The moment I saw the 500 fine taped to my gate, I knew Karen had just made the worst miscalculation of her life. The notice claimed that 3 square inches of my ranch were technically over the HOA boundary line. 3 inches. On a 40-acre ranch I inherited from my grandfather. That was the moment I smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was finally go time. You ever see someone grab a tiger by the tail and pretend it's a leash? It started with a note. Not a letter, not a conversation. Just a flimsy, laminated square clipped to my fence post with a rusted binder clip like it had been tacked onto a school bulletin board. Notification of violation. Unpermitted encroachment on HOA property. Subject to fines. Immediate corrective action required. I stared at it for a long minute, blinking under the midday sun like it might transform into something that made sense. I lived on a 40-acre ranch, land my grandfather carved into existence with nothing but a pickaxe, grit, and a prayer. The HOA? That cookie-cutter cult across the road with mailbox regulations and weekly lawn inspections? I wasn't part of it. Never had been. Never signed anything. Never agreed to be governed by their nonsense. The idea that they had the nerve to claim 3 square inches of my land as a violation was so absurd, I actually laughed. I pulled the notice off the post, tossed it in the passenger seat of my pickup, and figured that'd be the end of it. But Karen wasn't the kind of person who liked being ignored. She didn't escalate with logic. She escalated with volume. 2 days later, I was out checking fence lines when I saw her for the first time. Karen Withers, self-appointed queen of the HOA, standing at the edge of my property line with a clipboard in hand, a sun visor perched like a crown, and a measuring wheel rolling beside her like she was surveying land for a new railroad. "Excuse me," she called out, waving as if we were neighbors on friendly terms. "There's a situation with your fence we need to address immediately." I didn't respond. I just leaned on the post and watched her approach like a wild animal wandering too close to a rattlesnake. "This corner," she said, pointing to a patch of dusty earth no bigger than a bathroom tile, is 3.1 inches over the established HOA boundary, which means, technically, you're now within our jurisdiction. I stared at her. 3 inches? "Technically, yes," she said, flipping through her clipboard with a self-important flourish. "And that means your entire property is subject to HOA review, including compliance with architectural aesthetics, environmental standards, and community cohesion protocols." Community cohesion. I almost choked. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this is my land. This ranch predates your cookie-cutter cul-de-sac by 80 years. I'm not under your jurisdiction. That line," I pointed to the faded survey marker, "hasn't moved in decades." She gave me a pitying smile, the kind reserved for confused old men and stubborn children. "Boundaries evolve," she said, "and we can't just let rogue landowners disregard community unity. It sets a bad precedent." I shook my head and walked away. Thought she'd go back to her townhouses and flagpole bunting. But Karen didn't leave. She doubled down. The next day, a certified letter arrived. Same violation, now with a 2,500 fine attached. I called the number. A perky woman with the same sing-song voice as a cartoon receptionist told me fines would increase every 72 hours until the issue was resolved. I asked to speak with someone from legal. She told me legal was Karen. I hung up. 5 days later, I was served with a second letter, this time thicker. Notice of lien intent. They were threatening to file a lien on my property over 3 square inches of dirt. I thought it was a prank until I saw the notary stamp. That's when I knew Karen wasn't just playing house president. She was running a full-blown regime. I drove down to the county records office, slammed the papers on the counter, and asked them if the HOA had any jurisdiction over my property. The clerk, a tired man in his 60s, who looked like he hadn't smiled since fax machines were invented, typed in my parcel number and squinted at the screen. "No OA declarations attached to this land," he said. "Never has been." I asked if they could send that to me in writing. He printed it, initialed it, and handed it over. I felt vindicated. Bulletproof. Marched straight over to the HOA office with my paperwork in hand, ready to end the whole circus. Karen wasn't there. Her assistant, a kid barely out of high school with gelled hair and a poorly hidden tattoo, accepted the document with a bored nod and said, "I'll pass it on." I never heard back. Instead, the next notice was bigger. 7. 500 fine. A demand for full landscaping compliance. A citation for livestock-related odor impact on adjacent properties. I live over 500 feet from their nearest fence. You'd have to have the nose of a bloodhound with a personal vendetta to smell my cattle from there. That's when I realized this wasn't a property dispute. This was a siege. A soft invasion dressed up in stationery and fine print. One afternoon, I heard a strange buzzing over the chicken coop and looked up to find a drone hovering just above tree level. It wasn't mine. I walked out with my hat pulled low and watched it drift along the perimeter, pausing to angle its camera down into my land like it was conducting an aerial raid. I fired a warning shot into the air. Non-lethal, just enough to tell them I wasn't playing. The drone zipped away like a guilty mosquito. An hour later, Karen posted on the HOA message board, accusing me of firearm intimidation and reckless endangerment of community property. Screenshots of my ranch from the drone footage followed. She called it evidence gathering. I called it stalking. When I installed motion sensors along my fence, I caught 2 HOA board members sneaking around with measuring tapes and clipboards at midnight. One of them tripped the wire and bolted like he'd seen a ghost. I didn't chase him. I just printed the footage, framed it, and hung it next to my coffee pot. My lawyer told me I could file a cease and desist, maybe even get a harassment order. But the process was slow. Karen's games were fast. And every day, another fine arrived. Another notice. Another reminder that this wasn't about 3 inches. It was about breaking me down, forcing me into compliance. They wanted to bleed me into submission with bureaucracy and bully tactics. And the worst part? Nobody cared. The sheriff shrugged it off as civil. The county waved their hands and told me to get a survey. No one wanted to touch it. No one wanted to poke the HOA hive. But I was done playing defense. Karen thought she could annex my ranch with a clipboard and a highlighter. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had a few tricks of my own. I wasn't just a rancher. I was an investor, a silent partner in a dozen companies, and I'd just started making calls, not to the sheriff, not to the lawyer, but to the land office, to the bank, to the original developers of the land their entire HOA was built on. If Karen wanted to escalate, she was going to find out just how high I could climb. The gloves came off when the first compliance officer stepped onto my land without permission. It was a Tuesday morning, the sun not even high enough to burn off the dew on the pasture grass, and I was hauling feed when I spotted a white SUV pulled up just past the cedar fence. Unmarked, but with a magnetic HOA badge slapped on the door like it meant something. 2 men got out, late 30s, early 40s, wearing khakis, collared shirts tucked in like they were about to sell me a timeshare in hell. One held a tablet, the other a measuring wheel and clipboard. They didn't knock, didn't announce, just marched up the east fence line like they owned the damn place. I dropped the feed and cut across the field, boots crunching gravel, heart pounding. "You've got 5 seconds to tell me what you're doing before I start counting that as trespassing," I said. Clipboard guy didn't blink. "We're conducting a perimeter compliance inspection. You've received multiple notices regarding your property's non-alignment with HOA boundary ordinances. Section 19, subsection 4. Tablet guy piped up. "We're also here to document code infractions per Article 12C, livestock visibility, olfactory impact, and containment cohesion." I stared at them. Containment cohesion? "Your fence doesn't match HOA mandated aesthetic standards," he said, as if reciting scripture. "Your cattle water troughs are visible from the adjacent neighborhood bike path, and your barn's roofing color violates approved material palettes." I wanted to laugh, but the look in their eyes wasn't comedic. It was blank, professional, cold. They weren't here for negotiation. They were here for documentation. "This isn't HOA property," I growled. "This ranch isn't under your jurisdiction. You can quote all the subsections you want. They don't apply here." Clipboard guy tapped his pen against the page. According to our adjusted survey data, the southeast corner of your pasture intersects with communal greenbelt space, which, under revised boundary definitions, places your property under limited community review authority. You made that up, I said flatly. You made all of this up, he shrugged. Appeal process is outlined in the monthly bulletin. You're welcome to challenge it during our next HOA board meeting. Until then, the fines will continue to accumulate. I didn't respond. Just stood there as they walked back to their SUV, as calm and smug as missionaries delivering damnation door to door. That afternoon, I received a formal citation via email, 9/250.37. The 37 was the insult that pushed it from irritating to infuriating. Attached was a PDF listing 19 individual violations ranging from unauthorized livestock presence to light pollution from barn floodlights. I sent it to my lawyer. He replied with 3 words: "They're getting clever." The legal process was molasses. For every injunction we filed, they responded with a new violation, a new fine, a new bylaw they'd invented from whole cloth. It became a game of whack, a mole where I was always a swing behind. The worst part? They weren't operating on logic. Karen had weaponized bureaucracy into a form of warfare, and she wasn't alone. Her board was stacked with yes-men and petty tyrants drunk on neighborhood authority. The kind of people who hid behind clipboards and conference calls, who thought enforcing mailbox sizes gave them jurisdiction over lives. Soon, the harassment turned physical. First, it was the mailbox. Burned to ash overnight. Nothing taken, just a message. The sheriff came out, shrugged, and said it looked like a prank. I replaced it with a steel one bolted to a concrete post. They filed a noise complaint about the installation. Then my livestock watering system failed. Middle of the night. 40 head of cattle without water by morning. I traced the issue back to the line running from my underground well. Someone had dug up the line near the boundary fence and clamped it shut with a pair of rusted vice grips. No prints, no footage. Just more silence. I fixed it. Doubled the fencing. Mounted new cameras. The next day, I got another citation. Unauthorized infrastructure repairs. I nearly put my fist through the kitchen drywall. They were watching everything, measuring every inch, picking me apart piece by piece. And when the legal system didn't move fast enough to stop them, they accelerated. Karen posted a neighborhood bulletin stating that my land had become a public nuisance and health hazard, citing livestock odor and unregulated field dust. She included drone photos, taken without consent, of my cattle, my barns, my equipment. She even marked up a photo of my hay bales with red circles and notes. Possible pesticide runoff. Visual clutter. Not in harmony with community goals. My lawyer filed a cease and desist. They ignored it. I filed for a restraining order against Karen and her enforcement goons. The court set a hearing date 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. I'd be bankrupt from fines and false citations by then. They were bleeding me by paper cuts, death by citations. They mailed violation notices every other day. Fines snowballed with interest. They accused my windmill of violating wind noise ordinances, despite being over 800 feet from their property. They claimed my porch lighting caused community insomnia. They said my chicken coop presented predator attraction liabilities. I was being buried under absurdity. And it wasn't about the rules. Not really. It was about leverage. Karen wanted to crush me, break me, make me bend a knee. I was the last piece of land that refused to play along, the stubborn holdout who didn't decorate for fall, who didn't attend HOA movie nights, who let his pasture grow wild and didn't install tasteful perimeter fencing. I was the last square peg in her master plan of uniformity. I represented disorder, rebellion, freedom, and that terrified her. Because people like Karen don't want neighborhoods. They want empires. She wasn't satisfied controlling the townhouses and cul-de-sacs. She wanted to erase everything she couldn't regulate. And me? I was the first and final threat. My neighbors stayed quiet. Some waved politely but avoided eye contact. A few whispered apologies under their breath when they passed me at the feed store. "She's crazy, man. We didn't vote for this. She just bulldozes everything." But none of them stood up. None of them pushed back. Karen had built her reign on fear and fines, and nobody wanted to be next. One night, I caught movement near the north tree line. 2 figures, hooded, quiet. I stepped out with a flashlight and shouted. They bolted. One dropped a pair of bolt cutters on the way out. I installed motion-triggered floodlights the next day. Within hours, I got a citation for light intrusion into shared visual airspace. I'd had enough. I stood in the middle of my pasture and looked out over the land I was supposed to own, land my grandfather died, protecting from drought, foreclosure, and fire, and realized I wasn't free. Not anymore. Not with Karen's army of paper pushers, not with drones flying over my barns, not with anonymous hands sabotaging my well lines. This wasn't about property. This wasn't even about money. This was about control. It was psychological warfare dressed in legalese. And if Karen wanted control, she was about to find out what happened when a man with nothing left to lose decides he's done asking for peace. Because I had done everything the right way. I had gone to court, filed motions, followed the law. But now I was done reacting. I was going to flip the board, rewrite the rules. I wasn't going to fight her in court. I was going to fight her where she least expected it. In her foundation, in her jurisdiction, in the land her entire empire sat on. I was done trying to keep the peace. It was time to take the war to her. I couldn't sleep. Not from fear anymore, but from something deeper, something surgical and sharp, like a wire tightening around the center of my chest. I stopped pacing the house and started reading. I stayed up 3 nights straight digging through records, county deeds, tax rolls, survey maps from 30, 40, even 50 years ago. I wasn't looking for loopholes. I was looking for leverage. And around 3:40, 2 a.m., on the 4th night, I found it. A scanned parcel document buried in the municipal archive database, blurry and misaligned but still legible. It stated in very plain, unambiguous language that the land comprising the HOA subdivision, roads, sidewalks, greenbelts, and communal infrastructure was not actually owned by the HOA. It was leased. Leased from a development holding company called Marigold Equity Partners, LLC. My eyes didn't blink. My fingers froze on the mouse. That name hadn't come up in any of Karen's filings, notices, or threats. It wasn't on their website, not mentioned in any of their bylaws. Most HOAs gain ownership of common land after a developer finishes the build-out and formally hands it over to the association. But in this case, Marigold never did. Either by laziness or legal design, the HOA had never actually taken title to the dirt beneath their kingdom. They were leasing their entire existence, year after year, without ever solidifying ownership. I dug deeper. Marigold's filings hadn't been updated in a decade. Their tax address was an office complex in another county. Their registered agent had a disconnected number. It was a ghost company, a shell. But it was still the legal owner of every square inch Karen believed she ruled. I put in a quiet call to a contact of mine, a broker who specialized in distressed assets and dormant holdings. I asked him to find out who controlled Marigold now. I said I wanted to buy. 3 days later, he called back. "You're not going to believe this," he said. The holding company was dissolved 2 years ago in a silent merger. Assets were rolled up into a parent firm out of state. Everything they owned was dumped into a fire sale portfolio. No one's touched it since. "It's dead paper." "Not dead," I said. "Dormant." "Exactly," he replied. "And if you want to buy it, the whole thing, I can make that happen. It won't even raise a flag." I wired the funds that afternoon. It wasn't cheap, but it wasn't painful either, not for me. Like I said, I wasn't just a rancher. I had investments, passive income, corporate interests that paid for this land 10 times over. I just never needed to flex it. Until now. 48 hours after that call, I was the new owner of every road, curb, sidewalk, dog park, and HOA common space in the development across from my ranch. Karen's HOA, her kingdom. I now own the ground beneath it. And I didn't tell a soul. Not yet. I didn't want panic. I wanted pressure. I wanted them to keep stacking fines. I wanted them to keep filing threats. I wanted the hammer to fall when it was heaviest. So I kept quiet. I let them send 3 more citations. One for fence height nonconformity. One for ambient noise violations from agricultural equipment. And the third, a true masterpiece, for emotional disruption to the community through persistent noncompliance. I printed every single one, dated them, filed them, labeled a new folder, evidence for reckoning. I watched their enforcers do another patrol, driving slowly down the gravel access road that I now owned, clipboard in hand like they were taking inventory of my sins. I let Karen send me one final certified notice, this time with bold red lettering stamped across the top, final action before escalation. She included a court date. Her HOA attorney, one of those bottom-shelf suburban litigators who barely passed the bar, was threatening civil seizure proceedings if I didn't attend a hearing to resolve the matter of jurisdictional trespass. I RSVP'd with silence. Instead, I walked the perimeter of their subdivision with a map in my hand and a list of every easement, setback, and access lane that now fell under my ownership. I took notes, documented encroachments, flagged illegal expansions of driveways that bled over into common land, marked every decorative boulder and unpermitted porch extension that crossed the lines. Then I wrote letters. Not from me, from Marigold Equity Holdings, under its new name. I had my attorney draft them. Professional, clean, surgical. To whom it may concern. Recent title transitions have resulted in a change of ownership for the following parcels. As of date, all rights, maintenance, responsibilities, and legal jurisdiction for common use land within the HOA name community fall under the authority of Marigold Holdings. This includes, but is not limited to, roads, sidewalks, greenbelts, and recreational structures. Due to a lack of formalized easement agreements and the expiration of the master lease, continued use of these areas will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. We advise you to cease and desist from all enforcement actions until legal review is complete. I mailed one to every board member, another to their attorney, one to every homeowner in the subdivision. And I waited. Karen didn't respond for 2 days. Then she called my cell. The number was blocked, but I knew it was her the moment she inhaled like a queen preparing to issue a decree. "You've made your point," she said. "No greeting, no pleasantries, just rage disguised as diplomacy. This little game you're playing has gone far enough. We are within our rights to enforce jurisdictional cohesion." "Karen," I said calmly, "you're enforcing rules on land you don't own. I do. You're standing on a deck someone else built, reading laws written by people who've been gone for 20 years. Silence. "Then, you're bluffing." I didn't answer. Just let the silence fill the line like a deep well. Then I hung up. I let her stew, let her wonder. I knew she'd call the lawyer, knew she'd dig through records, knew she'd choke when she realized the roads she used to deliver citations were mine. And I made sure the next realization hit even harder. Every time her little HOA foot soldiers walked a fine over to my property, they were technically trespassing. Every surveillance drone that crossed the fence line was now an aerial violation. Every court document she filed claimed ownership over land that didn't belong to her anymore. She wasn't just wrong. She was in violation. Karen had declared war on me without realizing the battlefield now sat entirely under my flag. And the more they pressed, the deeper they fell into the trap. I hired a private investigator not for Karen, but for the HOA's books. I wanted to know what they were really spending their money on, where the dues were going, who authorized the legal fees, who signed the compliance orders. The answers came fast, faster than I expected. Turns out, Karen hadn't just overreached. She'd misspent, repeatedly. Paid a cousin's landscaping company with HOA funds, funneled consulting fees to a real estate broker she was rumored to be seeing. She was sloppy, arrogant, too secure in her throne. I documented every dollar, every date, and then I waited. Because revenge, when done right, isn't loud. It's methodical. It's slow. It's surgical. And when it lands, it doesn't just hurt. It rewrites everything. The hammer didn't drop with a bang. It dropped with a silence so loud it made every window in Karen's kingdom tremble. It began on a Monday, just past 9:00 a.m., when the courier stepped out of a nondescript sedan and handed a heavy envelope to the HOA secretary. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. Just handed her the paperwork and left. She opened it at the board meeting 20 minutes later, where Karen was already barking about increased visual disruptions from unpainted livestock structures on my land, and her face drained of color like someone had cut the power to her spine. She passed it silently to Karen. Karen snatched it without a glance, too drunk on her own monologue to register the tension in the room. But when her eyes landed on the first header, she froze. Notice of immediate property jurisdiction revocation. It was signed by my attorney, backed by land title certificates, tax records, easement agreements, or rather, the lack thereof, and full documentation of my legal ownership of every square inch they had been standing on for the past 2 decades. I gave them 10 business days to vacate the HOA office building, because I now owned it. The boardroom, the filing cabinets, the very floor beneath their ugly beige carpet, all mine. Their roads, mine. Sidewalks, mine. The HOA's prized Community Events Pavilion, built 6 inches over the parcel boundary, mine. I had served them with cease and desist letters for every active enforcement action still targeting my ranch. I filed them individually, each tailored with the precision of a scalpel, and I didn't stop there. Each board member got a personalized notice of trespass. Each one informed them that any further contact, visits, citations, or HOA surveillance would constitute a violation of private property law under the state code. The HOA's lawyer? I hit him with a formal ethics complaint for knowingly pursuing civil action on false jurisdiction. He withdrew within 24 hours. By Tuesday, they were in full meltdown. Karen tried damage control in the only way she knew how, by doubling down. She scheduled an emergency meeting, an emergency on my land, and when the HOA members showed up to the clubhouse that evening, they found 2 signs taped to the doors. One read, "Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted." The other was a full-sized printed version of the land deed, my name in bold across the top. Karen stood in front of the doors, screaming into her phone, demanding that someone do something. Her voice cracked when she saw the second courier car pull up. Another envelope. This time, the contents were worse. Not just ownership confirmation. This was a formal eviction notice. She had 72 hours to remove all HOA assets from the building, or they'd be considered abandoned. Computers, files, furniture, all of it. She threw the envelope on the ground and stomped it like a toddler. That moment, captured by a resident's Ring doorbell camera, would later go viral. But the worst came next, because I had been waiting, watching, collecting, and now I released it all. On Wednesday morning, a neighborhood-wide envelope drop landed on every doorstep in the HOA subdivision. Inside was a letter, not from me, but from my attorney's office. It included a full breakdown of Karen's financial mismanagement, every unapproved transaction, every diverted dollar, every shady payment to her cousin's landscaping company and her so-called community consultant. It also included redacted screenshots of drone surveillance orders signed by her, along with quotes she gave during enforcement meetings that would have made Stalin blush. "He's just one rancher. We'll crush him with paperwork. If he doesn't like the fines, maybe he should move to a cave. The HOA isn't about what's fair, it's about what's consistent." That line especially lit a fire. The letter was titled, "What Your OA President Hasn't Told You." At the bottom, P.S. Her car is currently parked illegally on my road. She'll be receiving a fine. And yes, her Lexus SUV was, at that moment, parked on my newly designated private thoroughfare, now subject to my personal land use policy. I issued her a 15-0 encroachment violation notice. She refused to pay. I had the vehicle towed. The HOA members watched from their porches as the flatbed pulled away with her car, her screams echoing through the streets like a fire alarm no one wanted to turn off. By Thursday, the board was fractured. 3 members resigned. 2 begged forgiveness in the group chat. Screenshots leaked to me from inside the HOA email chain showed pure panic. We need to remove Karen before this destroys us. He owns everything. We're standing on his land. She told us the developer handed it all over. She lied. Karen tried to fight it. Scheduled a Zoom community address where she sat in her kitchen with perfect makeup and a trembling voice, trying to spin the narrative. This individual has undertaken an aggressive and deceptive campaign to dismantle our HOA's legacy. She made it 4 minutes before residents started calling her out in the chat. Someone screen recorded the whole thing and uploaded it to YouTube under the title, "Karen's Kingdom Crumbles Live." By Friday, the vote happened. Emergency recall. Residents lined up outside the elementary school gymnasium, where they were forced to hold the meeting, because their own HOA building was now off limits. I sat in my truck and watched from across the road. Not as a participant, as the owner of the battlefield. Karen's face turned the color of curdled milk when the final tally came in. 94% voted for removal. No debate, no recount. Just a single breathless announcement, and silence heavy enough to crack concrete. She didn't even speak, just turned, picked up her purse, and left without a word. That night, I cracked open a beer and sat on the porch. The stars were clear, the cattle were calm, the silence perfect, until the sheriff's cruiser rolled up at the HOA cul-de-sac. Karen had tried to flee. Her last-ditch effort was to load up her SUV and disappear in the middle of the night before the financial lawsuits hit. What she didn't know was that one of the board members had filed charges: fraud, harassment, misappropriation of funds. When the sheriff cuffed her on her own front lawn, she screamed something about conspiracy and land theft. And that damn rancher. I didn't smile. I didn't even blink. I just stood at the edge of my porch, arms crossed, boots planted, watching justice pull away with her in the back seat. The next morning, a neighbor from the subdivision brought me a pie. Said her family had lived there for 15 years. Said she'd always felt something wasn't right with Karen's rule. She thanked me for standing up, for not folding, for proving that sometimes the only way to beat tyranny is to own the land it stands on. I nodded and shook her hand, told her peace was always possible. But only after you show people what war looks like when it's pushed too far. I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching as the new board posted notices about dismantling the HOA entirely. The residents were finally free. The roads were quiet. The letters stopped. And the corner of my ranch, the one Karen claimed 3 inches of, was now marked with a custom-carved wooden sign that read, "Property line, past, present, and final."